Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Story. We have a very special guest here today. I know I say that regularly, but this is someone who is near and dear to my heart, Anthony Koch. He is born in Quebec. He is fluently bilingual, and more importantly, at least from my perspective, he and I started Scheer Must Go together. Now, that might sound kind of negative for the Canadian Story, but I think Anthony and I both feel that the work we put in on that was for the good of this country and particularly for the good of our party. Why don't you speak a little bit about your background, Anthony, your love for Canada, and your love for your province?
Yeah, so the love for the province part's, I think, in many respects more interesting, but we'll get back into that for a little bit. So effectively, I'm the grandchild, I should say, of 4 immigrants. So I'm, depending on the definition that you use, I'm a second generation or a third generation Canadian, depending on whether or not you count the quote unquote immigrant generation that came here as the first, or if that's more the people who were the first generation that were actually born in the country. But effectively, my mom's Italian. She's from the Italian South. And then my father is a little bit more of an interesting mix. His father is German from Nordrhein-Westfalen, which I believe in English is North Rhine-Westphalia. And then his mother is a mix. So she was actually born and raised in Egypt, but she's ethnically a mix of Greek Cypriot, and Italian as well. So it's a melange of people from all over the world that ended up in Canada for a variety of different reasons. And then in terms of just my personal story, I grew up, like you said, in the outskirts of Montreal, mostly in Anglo areas of Montreal. And got involved in politics because I decided one day that I was a crazy person who was going to be a young...
Truly a crazy person.
Yeah, a young Anglo-Montreal Italian conservative. So I was...
You picked literally... You've always loved the underdog.
Exactly. I'm definitely one of a kind. Or not anymore, but there was a time where I was, right? Yeah. No, so that's where really the thing for me is I grew up, I'm a big history nerd, always have been. Politics sort of is an extension of that original first love, which is a treat because as a young guy, I was always asking, why are things the way they are? Why is it that Canada is the way that it is? And that applied to any number of issues, whether it was something just from taxes all the way to, okay, how come I speak English and other people speak French? And what's the source of the conflict that we often feel between each other and all these sorts of different things. And then it grew into a deep appreciation because of my love of history, I was able to invest in my own family's personal history as well. So I learned about where I came from, where my family came from. So like I often say, my Greek family that was in Egypt, that's one of my favorite stories anyway. It's not a happy story, but I guess it ends up a happy story, which is my great-grandfather was actually university educated, had a great job at what would later become Mobil Oil in Egypt, and they'd lived there. My family had a presence in Egypt, around the Cairo, Alexandria, depending. They moved around a little bit, but for the better part of like 75 years. So I always tell people that portion in particular of my family was in Egypt longer than my family's been in Canada. Up until the present day. Okay. And technically speaking, they were British nationals because they were Cypriots originally, and that was a protectorate of the British Empire at the time. And that was very common. You had a community in Egypt called the Metamasiru, not to get into too much Egyptian history here. But long story short, they're Egyptianized foreigners. So my grandmother speaks Arabic. Okay, she grew up in Egypt. That's the culture that she was brought up in. Obviously, she speaks like 6 languages. So very bright woman. But Abdel Nasser came to power in the 1950s. Pan-Arab nationalism sweeps the region. And he basically decides, along with his folks, that, people like my grandmother are not real Egyptians and that they need to get out. Oh, and by the way, to add on to the deal.
We're taking all your stuff.
Yeah, but we're not taking all your stuff.
Right.
Here's a document saying that you willingly, out of the loving and careness of your heart, are surrendering all assets in the country to the Egyptian state. Thank you. Please put whatever you can in a suitcase and GTFO.
Yeah.
Wow. How kind of your family.
It was so kind of your family to make that generous donation to the Egyptian state. Yes.
Exactly. And then so part of it just by sort of happenstance coincidence, like my German grandfather came to Canada because he wanted an adventure. I don't know. My Italian family, very common for a lot of people in southern Italy. The economy was ravaged after World War II. Things weren't that great. So like many people, my family decided to come to Montreal. That was an emotional experience. And when I went to Pier 21, actually in Halifax, and got to see the very place where every single one, with the exclusion of my Egyptian Greek grandmother, came into Canada through Pier 21 at one point. But then a great story that I like to tell, I know you're a fan of this one, Parker, just to put into like a full encapsulation of love of this country. And I could talk about it for much longer than an hour. But I think a great moment that really illustrates what I feel in terms of this loyalty and love for this place that gave me the opportunities to become the person that I am and to do the things that I've had the privilege. I think we can all agree. I've done some stuff at my age that, a lot of people only ever dream of doing, and that I'm not
in their whole lives, right?
And I'm very reconnaissant. How do I say? I recognize immensely. There, I was looking at that. I'm an Anglophone, and I'm trying to find the English translation for a French word. But I'm very grateful. That's the term. I'm very grateful and understanding that my life wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't for the institutions of this country that gave me the opportunities that it has. And the best demonstration of that is a couple of years ago. As you know, Senator Leo Housakos is a very big mentor.
Yes, I do love this story.
And so Senator Housakos calls me at some point. This was December 2019, I believe. So we're talking just over 2 years ago. He calls me up and he says, hey, Anthony, Prime Minister Harper's launching his book. And this is winter 2018. So yeah, that's what I meant by 2.5. Anyway, timeline's not super, super relevant. So he says, Anthony, Prime Minister Harper is launching his book in Montreal. He's having an event at the Chateau, what is it called? Chateau Laurier. Not Chateau Laurier, sorry. My brain is not functioning. There's the Marriott Hotel.
Yes.
Chateau Champlain. That's
the one that your grandma worked at.
Well, it's how you ruined the punchline. You ruined the whole thing. But that's the point. So I go to this hotel and I help set up everything right. And I was staffing the big man that day. And before the whole event got kicked off, I got to go to Harper's suite, and there was maybe 5 or 6 of us in there. And then, the former Prime Minister of Canada, a person who I looked up to, and he's the Prime Minister that, quote unquote, got me into politics, if you will.
Yes.
And I'm chit-chatting, and I look out the window, and we're at like the 50-something floor, whatever it is, right? And it hits me at that moment, like my grandmother worked as a line cook in this kitchen for the better part of like 25 years.
And now you're on the 50th floor.
Yeah, hanging out in a suit and tie I have no business wearing, okay, with big wigs and former prime ministers. And I just, in that moment, I was like, there are not many places on earth where that kind of occurrence happens, right? I wasn't born into the upper echelons of Canadian society. I'm not a family compact or a Chateau clique descendant, right?
No.
So,
no.
I'm just at another time I would have been called a dirty ethnic or whatever who came here, and I've had such amazing opportunities and experiences, and I'm not illusioned enough to assume that it's just because I'm so awesome. That it's because we live in a fantastic country that affords people like me the opportunities that I've had. And I
think you're a little too hard on yourself in that it might not be that you have the same credentials as others, but you have the drive to do. Like you act. You are an actor in the world, right?
Of course. I try my best to be. I think for me, it's immensely important that don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those people. I'm not going to throw back to like the Barack Obama ad. You didn't build that, right? And no, people have internal locuses of control, and you can control your circumstances. All I'm saying is, I never want to be the guy who, on the extreme opposite end of the spectrum, takes 100% credit for everything he's ever done without recognizing the conditions that existed, partially because of my family, and of course, but also in the greatest part. I always say, in today's day and age, we like to talk about privilege, and I don't have the same hostility to those kinds of conversations that some other conservatives necessarily do. But I always say that conversation, at the very least, should always begin with a recognition of the greatest privilege that any of us in this country have, which is either A, being born here, or B, living here at the current time and being afforded the opportunity to become Canadian citizens.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that for me is extremely important. So that's my point. It's not to undercut myself or any sense of false modesty. It's just very much to demonstrate to what extent I am conscious of the fact that this country really is a land of opportunity in many respects. And that I'm eternally grateful for the opportunities that it has decided to bequeath to me.
Yeah, well, and not only has it, I think that's one of the things that you and I bonded over initially, is that I had a very similar trajectory. It took me a little bit longer, but I come from a little tiny ghost town with 14 houses in it, right? And to have gone from that at 18 to 5 years later, literally flying on the Prime Minister's Challenger jet, working for him, is just... That is a story that doesn't happen in other places in the world, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly.
So two things that I want to talk about. One of them is an incredibly relevant thing to this very moment, and the other is something you and I have talked about a lot. But the first one, because I think it's so relevant, is the Uyghur genocide that's occurring right now in China, and the condemnation of it by the Canadian Parliament with a vote of, I think it was 260 to 0, was it? Do you remember the exact number? Yeah.
I think it was 266 to be precise.
Yeah, that's what it was. 266 to 0. And I loved a lot of the social media content that you were putting out on that. I find it completely baffling that the Liberals would not vote with that. I understand the real politique reasons for it, but not the character and moral. Like, how could you
This
claim,
makes sense. This makes sense to me.
Okay, well, why don't you explain why you think that this is going the way it is?
I mean, this is a very classic trend, and not, I don't want to draw comparisons all the time between Trudeau father and Trudeau son. But one of the things that never really gets talked or spoken about, I find, I genuinely believe, and I want to say this, as much as I support official bilingualism, that's one of the things that I think is a key tenet of this country. I know other people disagree. We're not going to get into that on this podcast. But when we talk about Pierre Trudeau's record, okay, even conservatives, the number one thing that we critique is his fiscal record, right? Because he racked up all this spending and deficit, whatever. We almost nobody in Canadian intelligentsia, be it in academia or just in broader body politic, talks about the fact that Canada's foreign policy in the 1970s and 80s was a tragedy of epic proportions before Brian Mulroney ended up taking office, okay? Pierre-Elliott Trudeau was, in many respects, the original communist bootlicker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, he really was. I mean, this is a guy who went to Siberia and made comments to the Soviets about, wow, look how wonderful this is. Like, look at what all the things you're able to accomplish. And it's like, yeah, because they have slave laborers and gulags who, you know what I'm saying? That's how this was built, Mr. Trudeau, right? So always had this sort of ambivalence or even outright admiration for the Soviet Union or other dictatorial authoritarian regimes, just because, of their ability to, quote unquote, turn things around on a dime and all that sort of stuff. So,
well, didn't the current prime minister at one point say that he has an admiration for China?
For the basic dictatorship. And I still, even given the benefit of the doubt on that, I still think the quote is often manipulated and taken out of context. But it's the same general idea here, which is like this weird, like when you start to understand that a lot of the moralizing that comes from parties in the world, like the Liberal Party of Canada, is a political ploy. That it's fantastic to apologize for things that you didn't do that happened 100 years ago. Because you get all the perks of being, look at me, I'm the righteous man, recognizing these great historical ills. And there's no cost, because everybody who is involved is dead, right? Like, there's no big, I can condemn Nazis all day long. And, there's no Nazi Germany that I have to worry about the political or economic class of Canada trying to interact with to get concessions. Like, plenty of American companies got rich off Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s, right? And these are the kinds of...
IBM, right?
Oh, exactly. So you have a lot of these situations. I mean, not to get too into this either, because I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I'm saying if you look at the Canada-Chinese Business Council, okay, and the people they hire, and you look at people in this country like... by the way, it's not just a liberal thing, but I'm saying Jean Chrétien, John Manley, Jean Charest. A lot of these people post-political careers, and some of them, when they're in this in-between period as they're transitioning away from public life, they're all on the Chinese dime. And people don't understand this. I'm not talking about old-style Italian corruption Okay, I can say because I'm a WAP, but I'm not talking about brown envelopes. Nobody's being bribed in such explicit terms. It's just like, hey, the Chinese consul generals across the country hook up local business people with Chinese clients, and it's bribery, but it doesn't feel that disgusting. Hey, let me just facilitate business contacts, and then you've got other big companies that rely a lot on Chinese imports or whatever. So once the money starts flowing, people are less likely to speak up because now there's actually a direct financial cost. So I'm saying beyond the fact that a lot of Canadians, and I can say even people like me and you, Parker, even though me and you don't own companies that are exporting to China. No, by the way, only like 5% of Canadian exports go to China right now. They're not a major consumer of Canadian products yet anyway. Okay. Our trade's still overwhelming with the United States, but Canadians buy a lot of cheap Chinese goods.
Yes.
And that's the real.
Well, that's really the global addiction, right? The global addiction is cheap goods, cheap labor. And that's the Chinese proposition. Bring your industries here, and we will produce your trinkets.
Exactly, and we'll make sure that all of your business leaders are on some level, will have favorable conditions, this, that, whatever, because they still have a 1.4 billion person market is pretty sexy.
Yeah. I mean, you don't need to capture very much of that market to take care of yourself financially for life.
No, exactly. And to answer on the Uyghur thing, just broadly speaking, like something that some people, not everybody is. I'm about to finish actually my conversion to Judaism. Okay, and here's a little interesting tidbit about me too. But like it's a weird. Like my great grandfather was a Nazi.
Yeah.
And now I'm becoming a Jew. So I guess, but my whole point is, so in some level, this is.
That's a redemptive story. That's a generationally redemptive story.
No, fair. But my point is, this is personal. The Uyghur situation is personal for me in this regard, which is when you go back, if you look at the historical record in the 30s and 40s, we actually have more conclusive evidence right now about what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghur minority in China. Or I won't say the Chinese regime or the Chinese Communist Party. I do not want to.
Yeah, it's not Chinese people. It's a dictator.
I hate making this comparison in general because it's Godwin's law. Everybody and their mother.
Everyone always.
Now.
Yes.
Everybody's a Nazi. Everybody's this. But this is the most appropriate comparison. This is the most fair comparison to the Nazi German regime and the treatment of the Jewish and other minorities in the country that has existed in the since World War II, I'd argue, in many respects, okay? You have a highly developed country that is systematically trying to eradicate a people. Okay?
And in the name let's not get this confused. Like Rwanda is totally different situation than this. Rwanda's like a war, right?
No, but I don't even like Rwanda was also a genocide. I'm not trying to to say that one is worse, or I find once you get into that, you get through the weeds and it distracts from the point that's trying to be made. All I'm saying is Canada as a country, okay, Lord knows our military has been garbage for years, okay? So no, to all the people who like to mock me or other people that have the same perspective as me, I'm not suggesting that we send Canadian battalions to drop down on Beijing and seize the country, okay? No, okay? But this sort of resignation, the thing that Canada has always had, and it's funny, because liberals are the first people to always invoke this, and it tends not to be conservatives who do, this notion of soft power, or this Canada has a moral weight to it when we speak on specific issues. Okay. And the most recent example of that in many respects was when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 80s didn't want to speak up about apartheid in South Africa. Guess who was the first guy out of the gate who did?
Yeah,
Brian
Mulroney. Exactly.
And that's why. Yeah, and that's why
the Irishman from Quebec.
Exactly. He maintained a fantastic relationship with Nelson Mandela his entire life, and he was invited both to the funeral and also to his swearing-in ceremony, right? And Mandela always spoke about the role of Canada, particularly in those early days, okay, when things weren't exactly the role that we had. So all I'm saying is, no, we're not going to bomb Beijing or shell Shanghai. Okay, that's not the world has changed. It's not World War II. Okay, we're not storming the beaches. Okay, that's not what I'm suggesting here. All I'm saying is why. I mean, I know why on some level. What I'm saying, we have to be the country when nobody else wants to speak up, and America is speaking up. So there's no excuse. But I'm saying, even in the event that they didn't, we know a genocide is happening.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
wouldn't we say it? We have no problem. Justin Trudeau literally said that we are, not only did we commit genocide, but that Canada as a country is committing an ongoing cultural genocide against its First Nations people. Okay, that was fine. He didn't need to do greater investigation. There was no need for any of that when it came to, him getting to throw the virtue signaling around in a domestic political context.
Oh, yeah, he'll do that all day long.
Right? Even Catherine McKenna put out a tweet yesterday, I'm pretty sure, about there was an incident that happened somewhere. I don't remember the specific details. A Muslim woman in Canada was the victim of an Islamophobic incident. And they were like, we will always stand up for Muslim women. And I said, yeah, unless they're being systematically raped, sterilized, and genocided by the Chinese government Communist Party. Then we have nothing to stand for.
Then you'll abstain from the vote.
Right? Right? And you won't even have the Albays, forgive my pig Latin, to sit down and actually face the fire and vote. No, you'll send Mark Garneau, and it's sad that they chose him. I understand because he's the foreign affairs minister, but Mark Garneau, regardless of the fact that he's a liberal, in many respects is a Canadian hero. And the fact that they put...
an astronaut. One of our astronauts.
And the fact that they put him out there to say, I abstain on behalf of the government of Canada was disgusting in a million and one different ways. Above and beyond the general level of disgust that should be afforded to the fact that there are atrocities and crimes against humanity being perpetrated in China right now. And our response is to smile, wave, and put our hands over our eyes and pretend it's not happening. Yeah. How's that for courage, right? Canada's back. I'm not trying to be like the classic conservative meme using all the same, but I mean, come on, guys. You want to sell Canada as this vision of this progressive, like heroic, we stand up for the frail and the disadvantaged around the world. And then every single time we have an opportunity to do so, whether it was the Yazidis when ISIS was committing genocide against them, right? Like we're nowhere to be seen. We're nowhere to be seen.
And I want to go into this because one of my favorite conversations you and I had, I was actually in Ottawa where we talked it was right after Erin had won leadership, and you and I were talking about the future of the party, and we were talking about the fact that Liberals come to, when we say that we want to put Canadians first, ask Canada, which is something that Erin has said, and that you and I think entirely agree with, we're accused of being racist. And I love your response to that. Why don't you just share that with the listeners?
Yeah, so I think conservatives in this country are too coy, to use a lack of a better term. I don't think we attack enough, and I don't think we almost feel like we have to be careful with what we say as if we're saying something wrong. And I'll give you an example. If I was ever in a scrum, I had a journalist throw a microphone in my face and say, Mr. Koch or Anthony, whatever it is, what would you say to anybody who would suggest that your Canada First foreign policy perspective is racist? I'd say, well, what race are Canadians?
Yes.
You seem to have an idea. You seem to think that Canadians form some form of race. So please let me ask you, because I didn't think Canadians were composed of an ethnic group or a race, but you seem to think that they are. When I say Canada first, right, I always say Canada as a country, a nation, national identity, as far as I'm concerned, and there's other people who disagree with me, I don't agree with these people, does not pass down through the bloodline, okay? It is a congregation of believers.
Yes, okay? Preach.
That's what it is, okay? For me, I'm a Québécois. I'm not a Québécois de souche, right? And we'll get into this a bit later if we have time, but I chose Quebec in my spirit. I learned, French is not my first language ever. I'm saying I adopted the nation as my own. It's interesting because I was born in Quebec, but I still assimilated. In some way I was an immigrant in the land that I was born in. I didn't speak the language. There was a cultural disconnect.
A stranger in a strange land, right?
Yeah, kind of thing. And my point is, so someone would ask me, don't you think it's racist? I said, well, last I checked, my friend Mohammed is a Canadian too. My Sikh friends are Canadian too. My Chinese friends are Canadian too. So I don't know why you think, but when I'm saying put Canadians first, I'm talking about everybody, regardless of race, religion, creed. And at the end of the day,
I'm talking about Canadians.
Yeah. And it's the point. It makes me laugh. It's like, would you ever suggest that somebody who believed they needed to feed their own son before they fed a stranger on the street, or that they're a bad person? No. At the end of the day, if you have extra food, then yes, by all means, it's the righteous thing to help out others. But if somebody in your family is struggling, then you have an obligation to take care of themselves. And by the way, look at COVID. The lie of the international world was exposed, because at the end of the day, when shit hits the fan and stuff gets real, oh, wow, the Germans care about the Germans first. And the Italians care about the Italians first. And India cares about India first. And it's like, that's not a bad thing, guys.
Well,
that's the way, like, you know what I mean?
That's the weirdest part of this whole thing is we've got this, and I, you know, this podcast is not about criticism, so I don't want it to become that. But I look at what the Liberals did, and it's almost as if they assumed that because they were always trying to look out for other people, that someone would look out for them when a time like this came. And what they have come to realize is it's literally their job to look out for Canada's best interest. And they thought that if they looked out for the world's best interest, that they would just, you know, get taken care of. But at the end of the day, if the Germans have to decide, are we going to be slower to vaccinate our population so that Canada can vaccinate theirs, why would they ever choose that?
Yeah, you never want to be in a situation where you have to ask really nicely for something like this.
Yes.
Right? And that's all you really got. It's like, hey, EU, you know, we're really good buddies. Like, you know, do you mind not putting us on your export ban list so that we can vaccinate our people? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, at the end of the day, like, goodwill only goes so far in crisis type situations. So, yeah, and that's my point, man, is, and I understand why this is the case, because let's be honest here, conservatives have practiced racist rhetoric in the past.
Oh, horrible. It's been horrible.
Not just in Canada, but around the world. You know, it's the lazy thing to do, which is to go for the nativist sort of, when you say we got to put Canadians first, unfortunately, and this is the way you can go talk to anybody, what a lot of people hear is, okay, they're talking about the old stocks.
Yeah.
They're talking about let's put John McPherson first.
Yes.
Right?
But they're talking about me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're talking about the David Parkers of the world, right?
Yeah.
And what's key is, if it's amazing. It's a story that I tell often. I was helping out a candidate in an election campaign during the 2019 election, and part of it, he asked me to help him with a meeting with the Filipino community in Montreal. And I was laughing because I'm watching the president of the association, who's he's been in Canada for a couple of years, but, you know, still very clearly an immigrant and prefers to speak Tagalog to English or French and, you know, whatever. But it was hilarious because he was talking with my candidate. And this is a guy who's voted Liberal his entire life, as long as he's been able to vote. It's a community, by the way, the Filipino community in the Mount Royal area in Montreal and Côte-des-Neiges, they vote Liberal religiously, almost as a bloc. And this guy was like, I don't understand. It was hilarious to me. And I'm not to say that this is what we want to necessarily do, but he was just like, I don't understand why we spend all this money on foreign aid when we have homeless people in our own country.
Yeah, right. He's been voting Liberal all of his life.
And I just started laughing because I went, oh my God, you know, Liberals would say this is like the most racist white man opinion that I'd ever heard. And so I just that man rightfully sees himself. Yeah, he's Filipino and he's proud of his heritage and the country of his origin. But he saw himself as a full citizen of Canada. And when someone says Canadians first, it's like, yeah, they're talking about me too.
Yeah, exactly. And more than that, I think what bothers me, and I want to reveal this, not in a criticism sort of way, but in a pointing out something to people, just like with the Uyghur genocide, right? Just like the Liberals will go around telling Muslims, literally telling Muslims that conservatives hate them. And here's the thing, conservatives screwed that up. Right? Conservatives after 9/11 saw they became opportunistic, and they said there's fear around Islam right now because of what happened at 9/11, and we can utilize that fear. And your mentor was on, Senator Housakis was on the podcast, and one of the things he said that I thought was so enlightening was there's two ways to do politics: hope or fear. Right? And Justin Trudeau has chosen the path of fear. He says he's chosen the path of hope, but what is his modus operandi? Dividing us. It's putting the Proud Boys on terrorist watch lists while abstaining from a vote on genocide. It's
but I will say though, the one thing that does bother me to a certain extent is like it doesn't have to be a choice of one or the other. Like, yeah, you know, do I think oftentimes certain right-wing fringe groups are overplayed by segments of the left? Sure. I think that they're underplayed in many respects by certain segments of the right.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
Right. And that's also true, by the way. Like I'm saying, you look at how conservatives talk, particularly in America, but also in Canada now, about Antifa and all this. And like we act like it's more of a cohesive group than it actually is. Like that's partially politics, par for the course. But I just think one thing that we need to be as a country and as a movement in the conservative side of things is we need to be consistent and we need to be honest and we need to stop pandering. And we don't do it all the time, but we do it enough. And I'm probably going to get flack for saying this, but we often do appeal to people's lesser angels.
Yes.
Or you know what I'm saying?
Well, because that's the easy way. It's the shortcut, right?
Yeah,
the hard work.
Not in Canada, it's not though. And this is the thing too. Like I'm saying, like beyond the moral concerns, it's also just bad politics in Canada. Like I'm saying, you know, our country has changed immensely over the course of the last 30 years. Like Canada is a country where just over 25% are visible minorities. So I'm not talking all time. I'm talking like non-white period. Okay.
Yes.
That's going to continue to change.
Well,
okay?
I'm just hoping every single person from Hong Kong decides to move here. All of them.
Oh, among many other, you know, population groups in the world that are struggling. I think we should be the haven for all of them. It's just that moving forward politically, the way, like, don't get me wrong, the media in many cases, and of course the Liberal Party is always going to treat us in bad faith. But I'll give you the best example that I can think of. Steve Paikin, right? A titan of Canadian media, was accused a couple of years ago of sexual impropriety in the workplace.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nobody bought it. And it was quickly determined after an investigation that actually there was a woman who was going through, she was suffering immensely from some mental health issues, whatever, and she made the accusation, but that it was ungrounded. Okay, there was nothing to it. And I thought it was amazing, particularly in the Me Too era, because everybody and their mother came out right away and said, there's no way Steve did this.
Right.
I know women, men, people of every, came out and said, you know why? And why? Because Steve never, I'm talking like I know the guy, Mr. Paikin, okay, lived his life honorably and decently to the point that anybody and their mother who would ever come into contact with the guy, okay, would feel comfortable vouching for him.
Yes.
And I'm saying the same thing with conservatives. Oh my God, why do people accuse us of racism and this and that, whatever? It's like, guys, because we've given people reasons and plenty ample opportunities to accuse us of these things. And if we're consistent and we demonstrate to people with real actions beyond just saying, oh, we're not this, we're not that, we're not whatever, then that'll stop working. It's like the best example that we had it in the live action. Stephen Harper, woo, the mysterious secret agenda. They're going to win their majority government and they're going to, he's going to bring in a Christian theocracy. And then guess what happened? He won. And the profits of the Liberal Party of Canada were exposed as frauds. And everybody went, okay, man, like clearly this is not what Harper's deal is. You get the crackpots who are going to believe that just because, they wear their partisan stripes so strongly. But I'm saying regular people, if you show them honestly, authentically, and decently who you are, they'll believe you.
Well, that was really the tragedy of the 2015 campaign I feel like
we burned so much goodwill.
We burnt so much goodwill for nothing, right? We got...
And that's a fun fact, by the way. That's something that I need to stress. And I always remind people of this. 2011 was a very unique election for many respects. But one thing that always makes me proud, in that election, the Conservative Party of Canada made history in that it was the only right of center political party anywhere in the world that actually received a higher percentage of the vote in support from immigrant naturalized Canadians than they did from native born ones.
Yeah.
Okay. So how's that? Like, that's really awesome. We put in a lot of work and first time or Canadian, I'll call them Canadians by choice, to say like immigrant, first generation Canadians chose us at a greater rate than people who were born here did.
And that's what the party we need to become.
Exactly.
And it's because they share our values.
Yeah, they do. Man, immigrants, like beyond the family stuff, because, a lot of social conservatives make this point, and I take it. It's well taken. But I'm saying you look at the entrepreneurial class in this country.
It's immigrants.
Right?
It's immigrants.
Disproportionately so, exactly, right? They're people who have an appreciation for hard work. I'm talking also from my own personal family background, but I'm saying whether you're Sikh, whether you're from the Caribbean originally, whether you were a Greek guy who came over in the 1960s. No, it's the same for the most part. And it's funny, too, because I will tell you, like, and this is something that I noticed not only in the Conservative Party, but just in Canadian politics in general, is like whenever you look at anybody's outreach teams, right? Like, oh, we're going to make you director of community. Okay, it's like it's tokenism to the finest point. Like they'll take some, like I remember I was actually talking with a friend of mine who's in a different political party, and they happen to be Indian, okay, but Sikh particularly, they're Punjabi.
Yeah.
And they wanted to put them like in charge of like this community outreach. And they basically went like, listen, man, I grew up in a community surrounded by Italians and Jews. Like, I'm not the person that you want to do this. And everybody was just sort of like, but you're brown.
Oh.
Right. That was the extent of it. It's like, oh, like, and it's hilarious because like, not to toot Senator Housakov's horn too much, but I have a tendency to do that. But I'm saying, like, if you ever see this guy do community outreach with, not just the Greeks and the Italians, right? I'm talking broadly. He's the son of immigrants. He grew up with that, immigrant neighborhood surrounded by a bunch of different people who all came to the country around the same time and were just trying to make their way up in the world. And when he talks about that experience, people go, yeah, that's mine.
Yes.
They don't care. They don't care that he's a white dude, right?
No.
They really don't care. They really don't care. And this is what I'm talking about. Is I find it hilarious, like this idea that in order to reach people, you have to like look like them or have the same name as them. There's often times where that can help, but we're too hesitant on that. And then like, yes, there's authenticity issues. Like, again, not to criticize this too much, but like Erin's making a very concerted pitch to the Quebecois nationalists right now. And it's just like, man, we need to do that. I think that's the direction we should go to a certain extent as a party, but it's just the most Anglo human being on the face of the earth from the GTA. Like, je vais défendre les droits des Québécois. Like, buddy, no one believes like you're the champion of the Québécois nation. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like nobody's gonna believe that, man. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not. Like, you can voice support, but you got to get a better messenger for that. So there's circumstances where there's nuance. I agree. It's just I think there's a lot of opportunity that we don't necessarily pursue.
Well, we haven't seized yet, but I mean that's what you and I are here for, to try to find those opportunities and do our little part as cogs in the machine to get the engine running. We're almost out of time here, but I do want to hear at least a 5-minute Anthony riff on why you love Quebec.
Why I love Quebec, because it's similar for my love for my other adopted people, the Jewish people in this respect, which is you basically have a group of people who are abandoned by their country in this strange land across an ocean. Okay?
Yep.
Are conquered in every sense of the word, and who refuse for 400 years to surrender who they are.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Through hell and high water. And it's not, at various points, that identity has changed or molded or whatever. But at the end of the day, a Quebecois, and this is one thing that I appreciate about Quebec relative to other parts of the country sometimes, you know what it is to be a Quebecois. You can feel it in your heart. You can feel it in your soul. There's an independent culture here. Like it's almost self-describing. You don't, when you ask, what does it mean to be Quebecois? What does it mean to be Italian? What does it mean to be whatever? Like the answers to those questions come much easier than it does to what is a Canadian. And I think this is probably great for another episode in the future, but it's like,
yes.
To be Quebecois is not to just not be an American.
No,
right?
No. It's a real identity.
It's a real identity.
Not only that, with real media that talks about real issues and like is watched by the Quebecois regularly.
Yeah. So I'm saying, no, for me, it's just partially it's familial, partially it's other things, but it's just, I mean, I love Quebec because I love Quebecois music. I love Quebecois food. I love the Quebecois people. Like you said, we've got a unique identity and culture here that's not found anywhere else in the world. And a lot of people don't understand this, okay? But like Quebecois do not see themselves as like French from France. Like there's relationships there, but there's no like, la mère patrie. Like nobody's like dreaming of some sort of French colonization or anything. No, like it's an independent identity. Like suggesting the Quebecois are like the French from France, it's about every bit as absurd as suggesting that Americans think that they're British.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's that level of separation. So it's just.
Well, here's what I would say. I obviously growing up was kind of taught to not like Quebec. Not taught by my parents, but it's just the pervading feeling out west is that Quebec is somehow getting a better deal. But when I've met you and, been in politics and begun befriending both people who've adopted Quebec as their home and people like Yanis, but also people like Alupa, right? Like these people who love their home, right? Which is really what it's about. And to seeing what a beautiful province it is. I have one. Our mutual friend David MacArthur once told me Quebec is the most beautiful province in this country. Now, there's going to be debates on that from every province, but it is a beautiful province. It's an absolutely gorgeous place, and to truly understand how the Quebecois love their home is to understand this entire project that I'm embarking on, which is to make people feel the same way about Canada as the Quebecois feel about Quebec.
No, I think that's the goal. And just as long as we recognize that, everybody's it's like here, to use a Jewish example, it's like Shabbat. Okay. Shabbat's about a lot of things. And everybody has their own, for some people, they love it because they're spending time with their family. For other people, they love it because they're getting closer with God. For other people, they love it because it gives them a 25-hour period where they put all their technology away. Whatever your takeaway is, whatever your reason for loving Shabbat, or in this case, loving Canada is, that's great. That's your reason. What matters is that you love it.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So just
love is a verb. Love is a verb.
Exactly. So it's just like I like that example. I like that turn of phrase, if you will, which is that we want Canadians to love Canada as much as many Quebecois love Quebec. It's just that recognizing that love is going to look different depending on the part of the country that we're in, and that's okay. We're a country we're a country of disparate tribes in many cases, and everybody's going to find something. We have to cast a wide enough net that everybody can find something to show their love for the country. But also, at the same time, one of the reasons Canada has been so successful, as far as I'm concerned, is that our definition of who is a Canadian, like we were talking about before, never was super restrictive, and it shouldn't ever be. Our country won't be able to survive if we try.
And the next time that you come on, which hopefully will be relatively soon, I do want to go way more in depth on the dynamics between Quebec and the rest of the country. But I guess I would just say we haven't talked about Quebec much on this podcast yet, and that's a big reason why I wanted to have you on, and we're going to have other people on from Quebec for sure. But for all the listeners who, have become bigoted towards people because they don't understand them, I would encourage all of my Albertan listeners to go to Quebec, and you'll realize the Quebecois are Albertans. Just they care about different things, but they love their home.
We like to see them. I always laugh. It's like, we're two people who we hate. Like, there's always fights. Not to say that we hate each other, but it's hilarious because we're so similar.
No, I know.
And I feel like that aggravates the conflict between us, because it's like yelling at somebody who's just as stubborn and angry as you, right? So it's the same sort of idea. But no,
I love that.
And listen, man. I know a lot of people don't like this old coalition, but still, the greatest coalition to ever be created in the history of Canadian politics is between Quebec and Alberta.
Yes.
Whenever Quebec and Alberta are on the same page, great things happen, right? So
this is the goal. Yeah. This is the goal. Well, thank you, Anthony. Unfortunately, I have a meeting that I have to go to, but thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for your love of this country.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.